The rain had already started by the time Olivia turned onto Northeast 33rd. It fell in slow, steady lines against her windshield, blurring the familiar outline of her small single-story house. She'd worked 30 hours in 2 days at Portland General Hospital. An endless stream of patients, alarms, and paperwork. The car heater blew warm air that smelled faintly of antiseptic, and for a brief moment she let herself imagine stepping into silence, maybe reheating last night's soup and crawling into bed. When she opened the door, the smell of new plastic and Freon hit her first. Then she saw it, the extra refrigerator. Shiny, white, standing awkwardly beside the old one she'd owned for 20 years. The kitchen looked smaller, almost foreign, as if someone had rearranged the space where her life used to fit. A bright note was taped to the handle in cursive handwriting. For our food, only Madison, smiley face. Olivia blinked, still holding her purse, unsure if exhaustion was making her hallucinate. The second fridge hummed loudly, almost smugly. Her original one, older and dented, sat pushed against the wall like an unwanted relic. She opened the new door. Every shelf was neatly organized. Sparkling containers, pastel-colored yogurt cups, individually labeled bottles of juice. Each had a strip of masking tape with black marker. Madison's eggs, Madison's salad mix, Madison's milk. Even the condiments were branded with possession. Her throat tightened. She turned toward the pantry. More labels. The salt shaker, the olive oil. Even the butter dish had new sticky notes. Mine. Madison appeared in the doorway, still in her office clothes, phone in hand. "Oh, hey, you found it." Her tone was light, cheerful, rehearsed. "We bought a second fridge. It just makes sense, right? You have your food, we have ours. No more confusion." Olivia's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Confusion. Madison smiled the way people do when they're explaining something obvious to a child. "Well, you know, I like almond milk and you use whole. I meal prep for Brian and me, and sometimes your leftovers take up space. This way we all have boundaries." Boundaries. That word echoed like a slap. From the hallway came Brian's voice, casual, distracted. "It was Madison's idea, Mom. We'll pay for the extra electricity. Don't worry about it." He didn't look at her when he said it. He just passed through, kissed his wife on the cheek, and disappeared into their room. Olivia stood in the middle of her own kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of machinery. The tile floor beneath her feet felt colder than she remembered. She wanted to laugh, or maybe to ask if this was a prank. But the way Madison started typing again, already done with the conversation, told her it wasn't. So she smiled, small, polite, like a nurse comforting a difficult patient. "Of course," she said softly, "if it makes things easier." Later that night, she reheated soup in the microwave, eating by the window while rain ticked against the glass. The new refrigerator's light spilled across the room each time Madison opened it, bright, intrusive, cutting through the warm dimness of the kitchen like a stage spotlight. Olivia watched the reflection of her son in that light, laughing at something on Madison's phone. The sound felt distant, muffled by the rain. She finished her soup, washed the bowl, and quietly placed it in the sink labeled shared dishes. When she turned off the kitchen light, the glow of the second refrigerator lingered, stark and white in the darkness. For a long time she stood there, motionless, listening to its steady hum. It wasn't just a refrigerator. It was a wall. By Thursday, the labels had spread beyond the kitchen. They clung to the bathroom mirror, the spice rack, even the silverware drawer. Little squares of tape, pink this time, fluttered from every surface like confetti after a cruel celebration. Madison's fork. Madison's towel. Madison's mug. The handwriting was neat, practiced, confident in its ownership. Olivia stood in the doorway of the bathroom that morning, toothbrush in hand, staring at the bottle of shampoo now marked Madison's. Hers sat beside it, Smaller, older, suddenly out of place. She almost laughed at the absurdity. A grown woman sharing a house with her own son, now negotiating territory over soap. But the sound that left her throat wasn't laughter, it was a sigh, the kind that dissolves before reaching the air. She tried to ignore it all. At the hospital, she was calm and competent, the nurse who could hold a patient's hand through pain without breaking. But at home, her movements grew smaller each day, quieter steps, shorter conversations. Dinner reheated alone. When Madison was home, Olivia kept to her room, listening to the rhythmic hum of two refrigerators running side by side, each one guarding its contents like rival kingdoms. That Friday evening, while folding laundry in the hallway, she heard voices coming from the kitchen. Madison's tone was bright, casual. "I just think it's healthier if we each take responsibility for our own food. She can buy what she wants, we'll buy ours." Brian's answer was muffled, but clear enough. "Yeah, it's fair. Everyone should buy their own groceries." The basket slipped from Olivia's hands. Socks scattered across the floor like snow. For a second, she stood there, frozen, listening as Madison laughed and Brian agreed again, his voice warm and easy, the way he used to speak to his mother years ago, before the house became divided by tape and unspoken rules. She picked up the socks one by one, folded them with deliberate care, as if neatness could anchor her to something that still made sense. But inside, something small and solid cracked. Later that night, she found another note on the fridge door. "Please don't mix up the containers again. Madison's leftovers are on the top shelf." Smiley face. She traced the smiley face with her fingertip. Her reflection in the stainless steel looked older than she remembered. Tired eyes, gray hair pulled back in a clip. The faint outline of a woman who used to fill this kitchen with music, conversation, the smell of garlic and herbs. When Brian came home, she pretended to be asleep. She could hear the clink of forks, the low hum of the television, Madison's voice floating down the hallway. Young, confident, belonging. In the darkness, Olivia turned to face the wall. The same wall where Brian's childhood drawings once hung, crayon suns, stick figures with smiling faces labeled Mommy and Me. She'd kept them for years, until Madison had quietly thrown them out during spring cleaning. Now the wall was bare, painted beige, spotless. She tried to tell herself it was just fatigue, that she was overreacting, that love could survive even this kind of distance. But the house no longer felt like home. The laughter from the kitchen was a language she didn't speak anymore. As the sound faded, she closed her eyes and let the silence settle in. It wasn't comforting. It was cold, heavy, and unfamiliar, like someone else's life pressing down around her. The house she once built with love now echoed with strangers' voices. Saturday morning arrived gray and quiet, the kind of Portland day where the sky seemed to hang just above the rooftops. Olivia woke early as she always did, the habit of hospital shifts too ingrained to break. The house was still. Brian and Madison had gone out to brunch with friends, their laughter trailing out the door before it closed. For the first time all week, she could breathe without feeling observed. She brewed coffee, the scent filling the air, then wandered through the hallway with a dust cloth in hand. The small home she'd once been proud of had grown heavy with silence. Pictures lined the wall. Brian in his Little League uniform, Brian at graduation, Brian with his first car. There was one missing, her and her late husband on their wedding day. Madison had said the frame didn't match the new decor. She stopped at Brian's old office. It had become a catch-all space since he'd moved back in. Boxes stacked in corners, unopened mail scattered across the desk. The blinds were half closed, letting in pale streaks of light that cut across the dust. Olivia hesitated at the door. She didn't want to intrude, but she needed to feel useful again. Cleaning was harmless. Cleaning was safe. She began with the shelves, wiping one picture frame after another. Then she reached for a stack of folders, resting beneath a pile of unopened envelopes. The top one was labeled Home Equity in Madison's tidy handwriting. Curiosity nudged her. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and opened it. Inside were copies of the mortgage deed, a refinance agreement, and a loan application she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. The papers listed her property address, her home, but the applicant names were Brian Dawson and Madison Dawson. The owner's section was blank. Her name wasn't there. Olivia flipped through the next folder. A drafted sale listing, typed and dated 2 weeks ago. 3-bedroom single-story home in Northeast Portland. Quiet neighborhood. Estimated market value, $410,000. The agent's contact information set neatly at the bottom, followed by a note in Madison's handwriting. Need mom's signature. Figure out how to get it legally if she refuses. The words blurred. For a moment, she couldn't feel her hands. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. A plan deliberate and cold, drawn up while she'd been working double shifts to help pay the utilities. Her breath trembled as she reached for her phone. The world around her felt distant. The faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the drip of a leaky faucet, the muffled sound of rain against the windows. She took photos of every page, deeds, applications, the sale draft, even the note. Then she slipped everything back exactly as she'd found it. When she stood, her knees felt weak, but her mind was sharp. Pieces she hadn't wanted to see were finally fitting together. The sudden insistence on boundaries, the labels, the quiet talk about new beginnings. It hadn't been about groceries. It had been about ownership. She walked into the living room, her hand brushing across the arm of the couch, the same one where she'd once held her newborn son, tracing the line of his tiny fingers against hers. Back then, she'd promised him he would never go without a home. Now he was trying to take hers. The thought stung, but beneath the pain, something steadier began to rise. It wasn't anger yet, more like a quiet clarity, a pulse of survival that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with dignity. She sat down, phone still in hand, staring at the photos she'd taken. They glowed faintly on the screen like evidence of a dream she wished she hadn't seen. For years, she had mended others, stitched their wounds, eased their pain, held their trembling hands. She had spent her life healing others. Now it was time to stop bleeding. Downtown Portland always looked different on Mondays. Quieter, more purposeful, as if even the rain moved with intention. Olivia parked 2 blocks from the law office and sat in her car for a moment, watching droplets gather on the windshield. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. Steady now. The folder she'd assembled over the weekend sat on the passenger seat. Printed photos of the documents, neatly labeled, her own small act of order amid chaos. The office of Paul Jensen, attorney at law, occupied the 2nd floor of a modest brick building near Pioneer Courthouse Square. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, offered a smile. "You must be Mrs. Dawson. Mr. Jensen will see you right away." Olivia followed her into a small office lined with shelves of legal books and family photos. A golden retriever slept in the corner beside the desk, its tail twitching at the sound of footsteps. The man behind the desk, gray-haired, composed, wearing a flannel tie under his suit, stood and extended a hand. "Paul Jensen," he said, "please have a seat. You mentioned it was about property concerns." Olivia nodded, placing the folder on his desk. "It's about my house," she said quietly. "I think my son and his wife are planning to sell it. Without me." Paul raised an eyebrow, but said nothing until he'd skimmed through the papers. He took his time, adjusting his glasses, reading line by line. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the heater. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted from curiosity to something like protective disapproval. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "this is your home. The deed lists you as the sole owner. They can't sell it without your consent. Any attempt to do so would be considered fraud. Olivia exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Paul continued. These documents, loan applications, sale drafts, they're invalid without your signature. But they do show intent. That's important. We can use it. He flipped to the next page, tapping the corner with his pen. If you want them out, you have two lawful options: a notice to vacate under Oregon's tenancy law, or an eviction filing if they refuse. You'll need to prove they're not paying rent, which, from what you've said, shouldn't be difficult. Olivia folded her hands in her lap. I don't want to destroy my son's life, she said softly. I just want my home back. Paul nodded, his tone gentle but firm. Wanting fairness isn't destruction. It's boundary. He printed out several forms and slid them across the desk. Ownership verification, proof of occupancy, an affidavit confirming unpaid contributions. Once you sign these, I'll file the paperwork. It will take a few weeks, but from this moment on, the law is on your side. She stared at the papers. The lines of text blurred slightly, but not from confusion, only from the weight of what they meant. For months, she'd walked through her own house like a guest, apologizing for her presence. Now she was reclaiming it, inch by inch, signature by signature. Paul waited as she signed, the soft scratch of pen on paper filling the silence. When she finished, she looked up. What happens now? She asked. He smiled faintly. Now, Mrs. Dawson, we let the law do what it was designed to do. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under a pale light, clean and calm. Olivia stepped out of the office with her coat buttoned, folder tucked under her arm. And for the first time in months, her shoulders didn't feel heavy. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs papers. By the time Olivia returned home that evening, the sky over Portland had already deepened to the color of slate. The driveway was full. Madison's parents' silver SUV parked neatly beside Brian's car. Through the window, Olivia could see the warm glow of the dining room, the flicker of candles, and the silhouettes of people she barely recognized as family anymore. She stood on the porch for a moment, the sound of muffled laughter spilling through the door. It wasn't the laughter that hurt. It was the ease of it, the belonging. When she finally stepped inside, the smell of roasted chicken and white wine greeted her, along with Madison's bright voice. There you are. We were just talking about you. Madison's smile didn't reach her eyes. Mom and Dad stopped by to have dinner with us. I hope that's okay. Richard Cole, tall and silver-haired, rose halfway from his chair and nodded politely. Good evening, Mrs. Dawson. It's been a while. Diane added with a laugh that didn't quite sound genuine. We just couldn't resist a little family night. Madison's been telling us how cozy it's been living together. Olivia forced a smile and removed her coat, placing it carefully on the back of a chair. That's kind of you, she said quietly, though I wasn't expecting company. Sit, please, Madison urged. You've had a long day, I'm sure. Olivia sat at the far end of the table, opposite the Cole family. Brian poured her a glass of water, but didn't meet her eyes. The chicken was perfectly carved, the table set with the good plates, her plates, yet the arrangement felt foreign, like she was dining in someone else's home. Halfway through the meal, Diane leaned forward, clasping her hands. Olivia, we've been meaning to talk to you about something. Just an idea, really. You've worked so hard all your life, and now that you're, well, at a certain stage, maybe it's time you had a break. Olivia set down her fork. A break? Madison jumped in smoothly. They're just worried about you, that's all. I mean, this house can be a lot to handle. Wouldn't it be nice to live somewhere easier? Somewhere where you don't have to cook or clean. Her words fell like polite daggers, each one wrapped in sweetness. Richard nodded. We actually visited a few assisted living communities last week. Lovely places, private rooms, gardens, medical care on site. Very peaceful. Olivia's breath caught. You visited. Madison smiled as if explaining something perfectly logical. We just wanted to explore options. You deserve comfort, Olivia. A place where you can relax and let the professionals take care of you. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence. Then Olivia turned to Brian. You knew about this? He hesitated, knife hovering above his plate. Madison mentioned it, he murmured. It's just an idea, Mom. You'd have your own space, your own room. We thought maybe it'd be good for everyone. We. The word stung more than anything else. Olivia looked around the table, at the soft lighting, the neatly folded napkins. The faces turned toward her with a mixture of pity and impatience. It hit her all at once. They'd already decided. The conversation wasn't a proposal, it was a presentation. Her chest tightened. I see, she said finally. You've planned everything. Madison reached for her hand across the table, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. Please don't take it the wrong way. We just want what's best for you. Think of it as a fresh start. Olivia withdrew her hand slowly, her expression unreadable. A fresh start, she repeated, in a place I didn't choose. Diane smiled awkwardly, sensing the shift in tone. It's not permanent, of course. Just until the young couple can, well, settle into their own rhythm. The air in the room grew thick. The candles flickered. Brian shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. That silence, more than their words, broke her. Olivia stood, collecting her plate with trembling fingers. Thank you for dinner, she said softly. It was thoughtful. She carried her plate to the sink, rinsing it as the conversation behind her resumed in uneasy murmurs. When she finally went to her room and closed the door, she leaned against it for a long moment, eyes fixed on the framed photograph of her husband on the nightstand. The house beyond the wall buzzed with faint laughter again. New voices, new alliances. It wasn't age that made her old that night. It was their cruelty. For the next few days, Olivia moved through the house like a ghost who had finally made peace with her haunting. She smiled at Madison over morning coffee, asked about work, and even complimented the new curtains Madison had hung in the living room. At dinner, she laughed softly at Brian's jokes, careful to let her voice sound natural, unrehearsed. If they noticed the change, they mistook it for surrender. On Wednesday morning, she baked muffins and left them on the counter with a note for everyone. Thank you for dinner the other night. Madison found the note, smiled approvingly, and told Brian later that maybe Olivia was finally coming around. They didn't see the quiet precision behind her eyes, or the way she watched them now, not with affection, but with the patience of someone who had stopped hoping and started studying. At the hospital, Olivia confided in her coworker, Helen Carter, during a quiet afternoon shift. Helen had been a nurse as long as Olivia, sharp, steady, and unafraid of truth. They're trying to take the house, Olivia said, her voice calm, almost clinical. Helen paused, hand stilling over the patient chart. Do you have proof? Olivia nodded. Enough to start, but I need more. Bank records, maybe tax statements. Madison's been moving money around. Helen glanced toward the nurse's station before leaning closer. I can help you look. My brother's an accountant. He can run public records. If there's anything filed under their names, we'll find it. That evening, Olivia returned home and cooked stew, humming quietly as the smell filled the kitchen. Madison joined her, pretending to help, while texting between stirs. Smells great, she said absently. You really should take it easy, Olivia. You work too much. Olivia smiled, stirring the pot. I like keeping busy. Madison didn't see the small flash drive hidden in Olivia's apron pocket, one that held photos of every document she'd found in the office. She didn't see the manila envelope tucked in Olivia's handbag with the lawyer's name written neatly on it. And she certainly didn't see the printouts Helen had emailed that morning. A list of unreported bank deposits made into Madison's account, some linked to the same company that appeared on the forged property loan application. By Thursday, Olivia's calm was so convincing that Brian kissed her cheek before leaving for work. "You've been amazing lately, Mom," he said. "I think this new arrangement is good for everyone." Olivia smiled, her voice even. "Maybe you're right, sweetheart." When the door closed, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the sound of rain against the window. She opened her folder again, spreading the pages like puzzle pieces, the fake loan forms, the draft sale listing, the bank printouts. Every line was a step in their quiet theft. Every number a thread of arrogance. She began arranging them chronologically, highlighting connections, marking amounts. Her movements were deliberate, methodical, the same precision she'd used when charting a patient's symptoms before surgery. Every decision, every note, was a stitch in the wound they'd opened. When Helen called that evening, her voice held both surprise and admiration. "You were right, Olivia. There's money being funneled through a small design firm in Beaverton, registered under Madison's maiden name. It's not legal. You've got them." Olivia thanked her, her tone calm as ever. She looked around the house. Clean counters, tidy rooms, everything in order, and felt nothing but the stillness before impact. They thought she'd given up. She was just giving them time to hang themselves. The argument began over something as small as a container of soup. Olivia had cooked it 3 days earlier, set it in the shared refrigerator, her refrigerator, and labeled it neatly with the date. Thursday night, she came home to find the container gone. The trash can smelled faintly of onions and broth, and among the scraps she spotted the plastic lid. Madison stood at the counter scrolling on her phone. I threw it out," she said without looking up. "It was expired." Olivia froze, keys still in her hand. "It wasn't," she said evenly. I made it this week." Madison shrugged. "It looked old. You really should stop keeping things so long. We're trying to keep the fridge clean." The calm that had carried Olivia through the past few days cracked slightly. She opened the refrigerator, her side nearly empty, while Madison's shelves gleamed with labeled containers and bottled drinks. "You could have asked," she said quietly. "I didn't think it mattered." Madison's voice was sweet, dismissive. "It's just soup. Just soup. Just her food, her shelf, her home." Brian entered moments later, damp from the rain, tossing his jacket on the chair. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Madison said quickly. "Your mom's upset because I threw out some leftovers." Olivia turned toward him. "They weren't leftovers. They were mine." "She has no right," Brian cut her off with a sigh. "Mom, can we not do this right now? It's been a long day." She stared at him. "A long day? I come home to find my food in the trash, and I'm the problem." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking embarrassed. "It's just this constant tension. Madison's trying to make things work. You're taking everything personally." Something inside her went very still. "Taking it personally," she repeated. Brian met her eyes then, his own full of frustration. "You always do this. You always play the victim, Mom." The words hit harder than she expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar. She'd heard them once before, years ago, during his teenage rebellion, spoken in the same tone, with the same careless finality. Back then she'd waited for an apology. Tonight she knew better. Madison folded her arms. "He's right, Olivia. Maybe we'd all get along better if you didn't make everything about you." For a heartbeat, the room felt airless. The rain outside grew louder, pressing against the windows like applause for their cruelty. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. "Everything about me? This house is me. Every wall, every payment, every hour I work to keep it standing." Brian threw his hands up. "I never asked for that, Mom. I never asked to be born. The words hung between them like shattered glass, ugly, irreversible. Madison reached for his arm, whispering something Olivia couldn't hear. She stepped back, her hand bracing against the counter. The soup, the labels, the laughter, all of it blurred. She saw her son not as the man she'd raised, but as a stranger defending the woman who was dismantling her life piece by piece. "Then I suppose we're even," she said softly. Brian looked up, confusion flickering across his face, but she didn't explain. She didn't shout or cry. She simply turned away, picked up the dish towel from the counter, and began wiping the sink as if cleaning could undo what had just been said. In the silence that followed, Madison whispered something and led Brian out of the kitchen. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hall. Olivia stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where her son had stood, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between breaths. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of love finally letting go. Saturday morning broke with a pale light that barely touched the curtains. The air inside the Dawson house was heavy, silent, suspended, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift that was coming. Olivia stood by the window with her coffee, watching rain streak across the glass, each drop slow and deliberate. She had already set the table, neatly arranged with papers, envelopes, and a single pen. The calm in her hands no longer came from surrender, but from certainty. At 10 sharp, a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. Paul Jensen stepped out, his briefcase tucked under one arm, coat collar turned up against the drizzle. He greeted her with a nod, his eyes steady. "Morning, Mrs. Dawson. Are they home?" Olivia nodded. "They're in the kitchen." When they entered, Madison looked up from her laptop, startled. Brian, still in his sleep shirt, frowned. "Mom, what's going on?" Paul set the briefcase on the table and opened it with quiet precision. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson," he said evenly. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Olivia Dawson to deliver formal notice of eviction and a preliminary filing for fraud investigation." Madison's face drained of color. "What?" Olivia said nothing. She let the lawyer's voice fill the room, steady as rain on a roof. Paul continued, sliding 2 documents across the table. "Under Oregon state law, you are tenants at will without a rental agreement and therefore subject to removal within 30 days of notice. Additionally, Mrs. Dawson possesses documented evidence of attempts to falsify a property loan under your names. These will be turned over to authorities." Brian's mouth opened, but no words came. Madison grabbed the papers, flipping through them so fast they crumpled. "This is insane. You can't just. You're my husband's mother. You're supposed to care about family." Olivia's tone was quiet, almost gentle. "I do. That's why I'm doing this before it's too late." Madison's voice rose, sharp and trembling. "You've been digging into our finances?" "You had no right," Paul interrupted calmly, "when illegal activity involves property belonging solely to my client. She has every right to protect it." Madison threw the papers onto the table, her composure cracking. "You're lying. You have no proof." Olivia reached into her folder and spread out the printed statements one by one. "Then explain these," she said softly. "Deposits from a design firm in Beaverton registered under your maiden name. The same company that filed for a business loan using my address." Madison's jaw tightened. That's just freelance money. You don't know what you're talking about." Paul slid another document forward. "We do. The IRS will, too." Brian stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "Madison, is this true?" She glared at Olivia, her voice shaking. "She's twisting everything. You're going to believe her over me." But Brian didn't answer. He looked from his wife to his mother, confusion breaking into something heavier, fear, maybe shame. The man who once shouted at his mother now stood silent, small. Brian, Olivia said quietly, I gave you everything. A home, a chance, and you let her turn it into a transaction. Madison's chair scraped violently against the tile. We were building a future. You're just bitter because your time is over. Paul gathered the last of the papers, his tone still measured. Your time here is what's over, Mrs. Cole Dawson. You'll have 30 days to vacate. The house fell still. The only sound was the rain against the roof, rhythmic and relentless. Madison stormed down the hallway, slamming doors, muttering curses under her breath. Brian sank into a chair, head in his hands, his voice breaking. I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't know. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger left, only the deep, quiet ache of recognition. I believe you, she said softly, but believing doesn't erase the damage. When Paul left, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, as if something toxic had finally lifted. Olivia stood by the window again, watching his car disappear into the mist. Behind her, the house was silent. No voices, no laughter, no more labels or taped names on shelves. For the first time, silence belonged to her. By the next week, the house felt cavernous, echoes where warmth used to live. Madison left early on a Tuesday morning, a moving truck idling in the driveway as rain spattered against the windshield. She took nearly everything: the new sofa, the dishes, even the curtains she'd bought for the remodel. When she slammed the door for the last time, the silence that followed was absolute. Olivia stood in the hallway, watching the tail lights disappear down the street. The scent of furniture polish lingered faintly, mixed with something emptier, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but waits. Heavy and expectant. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Over the next few days, she moved through the rooms like a caretaker reclaiming sacred ground. She wiped down surfaces, folded blankets, set one small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. The refrigerator hummed softly again, half full, but finally her own. For the first time in months, the air smelled of coffee and bread instead of tension. Then, on Friday evening, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Brian stood there, unkempt, eyes hollow, hands buried in his jacket pockets. He looked smaller somehow, like the man had folded in on himself. "Mom," he said, voice breaking. She hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in." He moved into the living room, staring at the empty space where the furniture had been. "She's gone," he said finally. "Madison left. Took everything she could sell. Even my car." Olivia nodded. "I know. I lost my job," he continued, rubbing the back of his neck. "They found out about the fake paperwork. Said I should have known. Maybe they're right." He sank into the one remaining chair, elbows on his knees. "I don't blame you for what you did. I don't know who I am anymore." Olivia watched him quietly, her heart pulled in two directions, toward the child he'd been and the man who'd forgotten her. She sat across from him, her voice gentle but firm. "You're still my son, but loving you doesn't mean saving you from your choices." He lifted his head, eyes glistening. "I don't deserve that." "No one really does," she said softly. "That's why it's love, not a bargain." He looked around the room again, the bare walls, the single vase of flowers, the faint echo of their past life, and something inside him seemed to give way. "I thought she wanted the best for us," he whispered. "I thought if I made her happy, everything would stay together." Olivia reached for his hand, her touch light, steady. "You learned the hardest truth there is," she said. "Sometimes love turns into protection, and protection blinds us until we can't see what's being taken." He nodded, tears slipping down his face, silent and unguarded. She didn't try to stop them. That night, after he'd fallen asleep on the couch, Olivia sat alone by the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor, tracing the quiet outlines of a life rebuilt from the ashes of pride and regret. The pain was still there, but it no longer owned her. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was freedom. 2 months later, Portland's rain returned with its soft, familiar rhythm. Steady, cleansing, almost kind. The garden behind Olivia's house glistened in the early light, the air thick with the scent of wet soil and mint. She knelt by the row of tomatoes, trimming the leaves, her hand steady, sure. The yard had changed since that winter storm of arguments and silence. So had she. The house behind her was quiet, no longer heavy with tension. The old refrigerator hummed steadily in the kitchen, now filled with neatly stacked groceries, her groceries, butter without a name tag, milk shared freely. The absence of tape felt like a declaration, a quiet manifesto of peace. Brian visited on weekends now. The first few times he came empty-handed, unsure how to stand in the doorway without guilt. Olivia always greeted him the same way. No lectures, no bitterness. Just a nod, a small smile, and the offer of coffee. Slowly, awkwardly, the distance between them began to fade. One Saturday, he helped her repair the garden fence, his hands clumsy with nails but earnest. "You used to make me help you with this when I was a kid," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice. "I did," Olivia replied, glancing at him. "And you used to complain the whole time." "I still might," he admitted, smiling for the first time in months. They worked in silence after that, the kind that didn't sting anymore. When he left that evening, he hugged her longer than usual, his breath catching slightly against her shoulder. "I'm trying, Mom," he whispered. "I know," she said. "That's enough for now." Days turned to weeks. The bruises in her heart faded the way old ink does, never fully erased but softened by time. She began volunteering again at the hospital, helping new nurses with their first weeks on the floor. She told herself it was just temporary, until she decided what came next. Then, one gray morning, as the rain drummed softly on the windows, the phone rang. "Olivia Dawson?" "Yes, speaking." "Hi, it's Helen Carter. I just got out of a meeting with administration. They're creating a mentorship program for retired nurses to train incoming staff, and I thought of you. It's part-time, flexible hours, mostly teaching. You'd be perfect for it." Olivia smiled, surprised by how natural it felt. "Are you sure I'm ready for that?" Helen laughed gently on the other end. "You never stopped being ready. You just needed a reason again." When the call ended, Olivia stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in long, silver threads. For the first time in a long while. The sound didn't make her lonely, it made her feel alive. That afternoon, she cooked soup from scratch, the kitchen filled with warmth and the scent of garlic and thyme. She thought of how different the space felt now. No tension, no footsteps that made her flinch. Just quiet, purposeful motion. Later, Brian stopped by with a bag of groceries, fresh bread, fruit, a carton of milk. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting them on the counter. Olivia glanced at the fridge. "Plenty of room," she said softly, opening the door. He hesitated, then placed the items inside, side by side with hers. No names, no barriers, just food shared. They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table, the kind of meal that didn't need conversation to feel whole. Afterward, Brian washed the dishes while she dried them, the clinking of plates echoing softly through the room. When he left that night, Olivia lingered in the doorway, breathing in the faint scent of rain and new beginnings. The house was no longer divided. It was whole, quiet, and perfect, alive. In a house once divided by labels, love finally learned to breathe again.